Hello and most welcome to 1784 of the Heidegger series. We would today start a new article by recommendation of Kalle Lundahl, The New Jerusalem, Wealth and Ancient Building Projects and Revelation 21 to 22 by Moss and Feldman. There's a little abstract we can begin with. Scholarly interpretations of the descent and description of the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21 to 22 have tended to evaluate the city against biblical and extra canonical descriptions of the Jerusalem temple, apocalyptic accounts of heaven, and ancient utopian literature in general. While some have noted the ways in which the New Jerusalem parallels the description of Babylon elsewhere in the Apocalypse, no one has yet considered the ways in which the New Jerusalem mimics, mirrors, and adapts the excesses of elite Roman architecture and decor. The argument of this article is that when viewed against the backdrop of literary and archaeological evidence for upper-class living space, the luxury of the New Jerusalem is domesticated and functions to democratize access to wealth in the coming epoch. The ways in which Revelation's New Jerusalem rehearses the conventions of morally problematic displays of luxury can partially explain later patristic discomfort with literalist readings of this passage. introduction at the beginning of the De Tranquillitate Animi, Cyrunus, a correspondent and young prefect in Nero's night watch, wrote to his mentor Seneca in great distress. Despite his moderate lifestyle and self-discipline, his mind had been dazzled by the sight of the house where one even treads on precious stone and riches are scattered about in every corner, where the very roofs glitter and the whole town pays court, and by the waters transparent to the bottom, that flow around the guests even as they banquet. The sight of these things is so unsettling that he returns home sadder and finds that there enters a secret sting, and the doubt whether the other life is better. Cyrenus is suffering, in the words of Galen, from acquisitiveness, the gateway character flaw that leads not only to distress but to envy of every kind. Seneca responds with directions for what has variously been called the therapy of desire, or the care of the soul. He recommends practices of self-discipline designed to erase distress. One can only imagine how Cyrenus would have responded if he had read the ekphrastic description of the New Jerusalem of Revelation 21 to 22. The city is constructed using the most expensive materials available. The walls are made with jasper. The foundations are adorned with every jewel. The gates with pearls. The main square of the city is pure gold, like transparent glass. The city is technologically superior to ordinary spaces. It is permanently lit by the glory of God, so that there's no need for lamps or even the sun. Paradoxically, this urban center contains with it all the splendor of rural creation. A river flows through the city, and on either side of the water grows a tree of life, brimming with 12 kinds of fruit that flower all year round. The New Jerusalem, we must conclude, is a city of luxury and wealth. The purpose of this article is to consider the significance of the New Jerusalem against the backdrop of elite ancient Roman building projects. While previous scholarship has evaluated the origins of the design and decor in the light of the Jerusalem temple, both the earthly temple and heavenly one, and descriptions of utopian spaces in ancient imagination. The question of the text's relationship to non-Jewish earthly architecture has remained unexplored. The current article will explore how affinities with Roman building projects affect our reading of this passage. Chapter 1. Utopian spaces in ancient literature. Even though, unlike other apocalyptic tours of heavenly space, the New Jerusalem of Revelation 21 to 22 does not contain a temple. The real and idealized temple is often regularly cited as a source for Revelation's description of the eschatological city. Throughout Revelation, there are references to heavenly spaces. For example, the altar under which the souls dwell and from which they cry out, that suggests it is a temple. the description of the New Jerusalem as the dwelling place of God and his people in 21:3b recalls the way that the temple functions in Ezekiel 37:27, which is itself a reflection of the priestly Pentateuchal idea that God desires to live in the midst of his people, just as with Ezekiel's temple, Revelation City is carefully measured with a golden rod to ensure its symmetry and perfect proportions. In the same way, the style in which the details of the city are enumerated is characteristic both of apocalyptic descriptions of the temple and other sections of the book of Revelation itself. Walls of precious stones are mentioned in Isaiah, Tobit, and a number of Qumran texts. Likewise, the floor under God's feet in Exodus 24:10 is described as looking like bricks of sapphire. A similar group of precious stones appear on the breastplate of the high priest in Exodus 28:17-20, and have been connected with the Garden of Eden in subsequent traditions. Isaiah 54:11-12 describes the construction of the New Jerusalem with what is again a near identical grouping of stones. In Philos Liber Antiquatitum Biblicarum, the stones are brought to the temple from the Havila, which is essentially paradise in the text. The physical relocation of precious stones leads Richard Bauckham to conclude that the New Jerusalem in Revelation is a temple city adorned with all the fabulously radiant precious metals of paradise. Finally, while Jewish sources do not regularly describe the eschatological Jerusalem as made of gold, both Isaiah and Tobit use the expression Jerusalem the golden and holiest parts of the Solomonic, Herodian, and eschatological temples were apparently overlaid with gold. Elements of the city's description are familiar to readers of other ancient utopian visions. In mid-century Common Era parody, Lucian describes a city constructed of gold, featuring near clear glass streets and surrounded by an emerald wall. It is perhaps noteworthy that the scholiasts thought Lucian's description was modeled on the eschatological Jerusalem. In general, Greco-Roman philosophical utopia does not regularly feature precious metals and jewels in the construction. Instead, focusing on temperate climate and the absence of war, illness, and poisonous herbs. Fruit-bearing trees, lush vegetation, and springs, however, are elements in some Greek conceptions of the afterlife, and Plato describes the world above the cave as a place of spectacularly large jewels. At the same time, the references to the trees, streams, and garden at the heart of the city evoke the primeval paradise from which Adam and Eve were ejected in Genesis 3. Psalm 22 refers to the bucolic setting and quiet waters in which the psalmist expects to enjoy God's protection and provision. Genesis 2:3 describes Eden as a place filled with fruit-bearing trees, which, much like the tree of healing, have a potential to affect the permanent transformation of those who ate from them. In addition to evoking the glassy marble feel of the Herodian temple, the glass-like floor may well have served as a gesture towards the waters of creation. Certainly, many of the specific details of the New Jerusalem, as well as the broad contours of its description, fit well within the conventions of Second Temple Jewish descriptions of otherworldly or idyllic space. In particular, the repeated references to symbolic numbers, the utilization of precious materials, the precise measuring of the city, and the notion of God dwelling in a physical structure were familiar to those who heard biblical and extra-canonical traditions about both heaven and the eschaton. At the same time, the city contains no temple, and while the trees gesture to Eden, the scene is not a straightforward restoration of paradise. think that could be a fit place for discussions. Put a mark here at page 355. We go to the very first page, the opening page, if you please. Go to the introduction. Some interesting hinting lead, I would say. How Serenus writes to his mentor Seneca, a Stoic philosopher, how his mind had been dazzled by the sight of a house where one even treads on precious stone and riches are scattered about in every corner, where the very roofs glitter and the whole town pays court, and so forth. Serenus had been affected by the riches, the overpowering sights, the splendor. Galen is commenting on the next page that Serenus is suffering from acquisitiveness, the gateway character flaw that leads not only to distress but to envy of every kind. Seneca responds wisely as ever with directions for what he has variously been called the therapy of desire, or the care of the soul. He recommends practices of self-discipline designed to erase distress. In this longer quote, there is a whole alley of connections. In the very text, you will see that it connects to why the city of Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, it's not a perfect representation of heaven for these reasons. in my take here also, and that is me personally, Seneca is not recommending austerity or frugality. It's how we are composed that we don't confuse inner with outer. Serenus need to be balanced to approach the splendor. His soul needs to be flawless and whole. Otherwise, it will be the fault that leads his desire. And as we know, those desires of envy and greed, they are unquenchable. A third way that also connects to the other text is that in Serenus, the distinction between inner and outer is too sharp. So his inner is, if you get my drift here, is too distant or distanced to the glory of the outside, and that makes him dazzled. So you see here the too sharp distinction between inner and outer has moral and, so to speak, spiritual consequences, and they most often leads to bedazzlement, lack of balance. We get further from heaven. The oversimplification could be, and that's a fourth hint, that gold should be abandoned and no adornment should be done to the world. We have a hint on the same page, 352, further down. While, that's the last sentence of 352, while previous scholarship has evaluated the origins of the design and decor in the light of the Jerusalem temple, both earthly temple and heavenly one, and descriptions of utopian spaces in ancient imagination. The question of the text's relationship to non-Jewish earthly architecture has remained unexplored. So we have a clear hint how the connection is between the utopia or the higher place and earthly buildings. You could also see that as equalizing out the disbalance between the inner spirituality and the outer satisfaction, and how it is how its importance is to equalize that disbalance. On page 355, once more, this very important feature of measuring out is once more mentioned. It is the penultimate sentence of the third paragraph. In particular, the repeated references to symbolic numbers, the utilizations of precious materials, and the precise measuring of the city, and the notion of God dwelling in a physical structure were familiar to those who heard biblical and extra-canonical traditions about both heaven and the eschaton. Our participation becomes hindered by this sharp division between inner and outer, that I would say was the bedazzlement of Serenus. By getting us, the humans, the observers, involved, the distance become less, and our concepts, our wishes, both the heavenly and earthly, become real. As we said earlier in the Goldfarb articles, and also Johnston pointing to it, and we mentioned it quite a lot in connection with Meredith Warren. Reality becomes true only when we get engaged, and the measuring is a doing done by us to drag us in to an equilibrium between inner and outer, where they are deeply enfolded. You can also call it entangled. Kalle Lundahl, please enter.
Thank you. Alexander the Great was lucky enough to have Aristotle, the philosopher, as his teacher. These two seem to have a good relationship until to the very end. While Nero, he was also lucky to have a great philosopher as his teacher, Seneca the Younger. But their relationship became bitter towards the end. So Seneca wanted to install good principles in the young Nero.
Yeah.
My guess is that this Serenus, who is described as a correspondent and young prefect in Nero's Night Watch, could even be an alter ego for Nero himself, perhaps. So what happened is that there was a great fire of Rome in 64, and as we know, Nero accused the Christians of being the guilty of putting this fire. So this happened in 64. And we could say perhaps from 64 onwards, Nero showed his bad side. And next year, 65, he forced Seneca to commit suicide.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
So, yes, so it's absolutely. So 64 and 65 are horrific years for Rome, for philosophy. Seneca was killed, or he was forced to commit suicide, and then Nero also persecuted Christians. And I think Serenus is an alter ego, as I told you, of Nero himself, and you can almost see a pun in his name, Serenus. He was not serene, so to say,
No.
when he saw these riches.
Bedazzled.
So let's imagine the young Nero. He is not satisfied with his current palace. He wants something bigger. So luckily for him, there's a fire in 64. He wants to then, after the fire, create a huge palace to himself, which is known as the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. So it's Dome Aurea, I can show you. Yeah. You can today actually visit it, and I visited Dome 12 years ago. Let me see the Wikipedia, English Wikipedia.
The House of Gold.
Yes. Yes. This could almost, it's the House of Gold, it's really, we don't see, it was a luxury place, and it was rediscovered during the Renaissance, and it is by Raphael and so forth. There are no good pictures of it, but it was we could say it could fit almost this description. When Seneca wrote this, there was no Domus Aurea, of course, because Seneca committed suicide in 65, and Domus Aurea was Nero began to build it sometime 68 or some in that area. But it could almost be a prefiguration of what perhaps Nero was telling his teacher Seneca. I want a real huge palace so I can live like a king.
Yeah.
So
one could say that Nero was after that not a really happy fellow.
no. So this is almost, as you say in Swedish, kusligt. How do you say it? This is creepy in a way. This how this almost prefigures the Domus Aurea, the madness of Nero. This passage. He couldn't Seneca say right out Serenus was Nero himself, and so he had to find a alter ego Serenus.
Of course. Very interesting.
There are a lot of a detail is this all these great authors, they like their duels, like Plato had also these spectacular duel
Yeah, I
scenes.
know. Plato is a good example of that desire. Although the desire of Plato often seems otherworldly, it does have similarities to the this balance in Serenus/Nero.
And during the ages, people have been fascinated by these precious stones. In the Renaissance, for instance, Luther, he wanted, in order to understand the book of Revelation better, he asked his friend Cranach if he could go and see the stones in the collection of his patron, so he could, so to say, get the feeling for the book of Revelation.
Aha.
So his voice to read about Jasper is very, it becomes very abstract. We don't really get a feeling for these stones if you are actually not working with them every day. All this. So for ancients, they thought that there was some power in them. You have them in also on Aaron's breastplate. As mentioned in this text. Let me see what the Aaron.
But Jasper, I've seen it, and it's both very nice to handle and to watch.
Yes, in the also the yeah, also high priest had this breastplate of the gems.
Yeah.
So they're very precious, important, both in so to say biblical and secular texts, if you say so. And we don't really observe them because we don't have any real contact with them. But perhaps we end there, Hans.
Yes, thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. Nice comment as always. For Nero, one almost feel a little compassion with maybe one of the worst persons in history. But I think it's important to understand rather than only despise. But of course, if there is a disbalance struck between inner and outer, eternal suffering will enter. Will enter.
No, I got an idea. I got an idea here actually. So in the book.
You found it, Kalle? Are you with me? I think we got some problem with the connection with Kalle here. Are you with us? Seem to be coming and going. You had some interesting line to add there. I do have to end here, I'm afraid. So I say thank you very much for listening in. Have a very good day, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye.